How do we test if the broadcast is
Hi,
working?
everyone. So I see people joining, and we will give everyone a few minutes, and then we will kick off the session.
Shall we kick off, Zina?
Great. Yep. So hi, everyone. Welcome. Thank you for taking the time to be with us today. A few things to note before we kick off, and I hand it over to Eduardo. One, this is being recorded. We will share the recording with everyone after the webinar. And two, we encourage you to ask questions throughout. Everyone is on mute, so please post your questions on the Q&A tab, which we will be monitoring throughout the webinar. And I will now hand it over to Eduardo.
Okay, so hello everyone. Thank you for joining us. We are broadcasting to you live from the planet Earth, I think, as I'm currently in Japan. Dr. Fayyad is in the US, I presume, and then Shalish is in Malaysia. So yeah, it's very international webinar we have for you today. We're going to talk about some great things about doing AI and helping your business out. So with that, let's get started. So my name, I'll just introduce everyone first really quickly here. My name is Eduardo Gonzalez. I'm the Chief Innovation Officer at SkyMind, and I'm the CEO and founder of a new company, Express AI, which is a SkyMind subsidiary that provides AI solutions to automation challenges. So quick intro about me is I've spent most of my career actually in Japan. I also did a little work in the United States, but I worked at Panasonic, then a Japanese system integrator, where I got to work with a lot of Japan's largest companies, and then finally at SkyMind, where I got a chance to help many Fortune 500 companies, both inside and outside of Japan, get their AI research into production systems. So we kind of started very early there. I'm very happy to have that experience. And with us is, and I would say our host here at Hong Leong Bank, is Shailesh Grover. He is the Chief Digital and Innovation Officer at Hong Leong Bank. And there he's responsible for coordinating the strategic execution and the strategic execution of the bank's ambitious digital transformation agenda. And that helps ensure that Hong Leong Bank continues to have an industry-leading and innovative digital capabilities in all areas of the bank's business. Prior to joining Hong Leong Bank, Shailesh was an executive director at AT&T, a managing director at Barclays. He was and a partner at Capco. So he has over 25 years of experience. During his tenure at Barclays, he was responsible to help develop its customer-centric digital and mobile and online services, which I think were a first of its kind, and it really helped transform that customer journey across the entire business. He's great. He's a thought leader and a practitioner of innovation, and he helps transform ideas into business growth and customer outcomes. So I'm very happy and privileged to speak with him today. And also, I would say our guest is Dr. Usama Fayyad, who's a very decorated gentleman here. So let's give him his proper introduction. So Dr. Usama Fayyad is currently the CEO and the chairman of Open Insights, a company that he founded in 2008 after leaving Yahoo. For those who are not familiar with Open Insights, it enables enterprises to get value out of their data assets and create new business models based off of the evolving economy of interactions. Before that, or maybe not before that, but he also served as the Global Chief Data Officer at Barclays Bank in London, and also launched the Oasis 500, which is the largest tech startup accelerator in the Middle East and North Africa. Before that, he was CDO at Yahoo, and he helped form the Yahoo Research Labs, which is, I would say, kind of like the birthplace of big data outside of Google, where they created the first papers. They led, Yahoo Research essentially led the open source Hadoop project and really helped kickstart the entire big data movement. So very strong foundation of this entire AI ecosystem. Before that, he held leadership roles at Microsoft, founded the machine learning systems group at NASA JPL, where he wrote papers about finding volcanoes in Venus, for example. Academically, he received his PhD in engineering and AI and machine learning from the University of Michigan. And he's published over 100 technical articles on machine learning, data mining, and databases, holds over 30 patents, and is a fellow of both the AAAI and ACM. So very honored and humbled to be able to speak with him and help move this conversation along with Shailesh about having AI and helping it, help your company drive the digital transformation. Okay, so with that, I think we will start with Dr. Usama's presentation on is AI relevant to your data strategy? So take it away. You're on mute, unfortunately.
Thank you, Eduardo, for for pointing that out and for a great introduction. It's great to be here. So we want this this webinar to be more of a fireside chat and a discussion between the three of us. But we thought that in the beginning we would start by sharing with you very short presentations, just to basically make a few points of view and effectively decide what are the big issues that we're thinking about, and what are the things we would like you to think about as you start asking questions. Eduardo will be asking us questions. We'd love to hear your questions and make this as interactive as possible. So I'll go through this very quickly just to be very brief. Shailesh will do the same, and then we'll move on to our interactive discussion. So we all know that digital transformations have been going on for quite a while. They have been able to transform jobs in significant ways. Think of an accountant of 60 years ago versus what an accountant does today. They almost have nothing to do with each other. The job has been completely transformed from one where you had to have a good handwriting and good addition skills to one where you don't have to think about addition and you have to think about strategic financial perspective. So basically that automation led to an elevation, and we have many more accountants today than we ever had in those old days. With the coronavirus pandemic, another thing happened. The world's reaction to it has accelerated us into shutting down many parts of the economy and forcing us all to go to the e-channel. So if you can't go to the store, obviously your only choices are, and this is very lucky for Amazon, to go do orders online, and for all the online players, of course. And the adoption of e-commerce has accelerated like no other time, which is why you see Amazon stock kind of running like crazy. Every service went to e-service, including banking, which is going to be the focus of our discussion. So since we can't go to the branch, the question now is, does the digital channel do the job for us, for paying our bills, and the same is true for almost any other function in the economy. The shock has brought rapid culture change, much more than even technology change. I would say the technology change has been minuscule because we've been ready technologically compared to the culture change, right? So typically wisdom brings kind of risk aversion. You know, let's wait and see what others do. Let's not disrupt how we deal with customers. But this pandemic and the reaction to it has forced most management in almost all companies to realize that, hey, if you're not digital, you're either dead or walking dead. So that was the shock phase, which basically left no time to deliberate, forced to go digital, ready or not, comfortable or not, risky or not. Then something interesting happened. Oh, everybody said, you know, companies that used to say you cannot work from home, I need you in the office, suddenly said, I don't need you in the office. This is actually working, right? Many of the companies who took their business to the e-channel for the first time realized, hey, this is actually working. It's not so risky after all. It's not so threatening. And with that, kind of the risk aversion is overcome, and you get the wide acceptance, which makes digital even bigger priority because now they're thinking strategically about what it means. This basically, took many companies who adopted digital channels seriously into effectively hyper growth, especially over a few months, which is phenomenal. Now, the problem with all of this is you can go digital, you can digitize your interactions, but you do it also at a big risk, and this is happening, which is losing kind of the ability to understand what is the customer going through, what is their experience, are they happy, are the services being rendered effectively, why are the customers leaving us, where are they going when they leave us, what is making customers unhappy, what is delighting them, and that kind of leads to a certain set of a disease I call blindness. So the question is, how do we restore intimacy to this digital channel? A few examples on kind of failures and successes in the past. Kodak is a company that was around for 124 years before effectively disappearing because they could not understand the significance of digital photography, even though they actually helped invent it and helped create the first digital camera and so forth. Very recently, we're now seeing in the US at least, a whole slew of bankruptcy filings, most recently JCPenney and many others. And I'll tell you, this is a company that kind of watched its revenue continuously drop. And finally, the pandemic essentially forced it into total bankruptcy. And now we're not talking about a small shop here. We're talking about a company that was around for 118 years, before they went to bankruptcy, which means they survived world wars. They saw previous pandemics, etc. So this digital is a big deal, and this is why we should care about it. In the US, a great example of financial firms that have gone digital very successfully is Capital One. I've listed some of their great achievements here, and they've actually realized a lot of the value. In fact, I love the quote by their CEO, Richard Fairbank, who says, I think it's a bit of a fool's errand to chase digital for the sake of cost reduction, because he views it not as a cost reduction. He views it as a huge strategic game changer and a big boost to the business. DBS went through a very similar situation where they basically went from being considered a failing bank in 2013 to going through a major transformation that put them way ahead of the rest. And now they are, of course, the leading financial institution, at least by numbers and by volume in Singapore. Many organizations are, of course, born digital. Some disruptors embrace digital early on because that is their model. However, for most companies, they typically do digital and forget about the data. They do it tactically because they're trying to digitize their processes and do automation. And they're usually not ready to deal with the resulting volume of data that comes out of it. Effectively, most digital transformations have produced instant technical debt because people realized, hey, we did it wrong, we didn't measure the right things, we need to rebuild it, and now we're learning a lot more. So with this flux of data, and typically it's 10 to 100 times, we see 100 times as typical when you go from a traditional channel to a digital channel. So how do you make this data work for the business that's coming in and literally kind of submerging many businesses where they can't do much with that data? In banking in particular, I love to use the example of, if you think of a bank 100 years ago, the front office was intimate. The branch manager and the staff knew every client. They knew whether they were risky or not. They knew who they were. They knew what they wanted, so understood intent. The back office was simple, right? KYC, which today is a very expensive operation in many banks, used to be nothing, right? You pretty much knew or didn't know the client. Risk assessment was done naturally and by intuition. As they went digital, the front office basically lost all knowledge effectively of a customer, and simple stuff like KYC became very expensive programs costing hundreds of millions of pounds in banks like Barclays. Same with risk and finance, etc. So basically front office went blind, back office became super expensive in trying to cope with this. Now, this transactional view of the customer, as opposed to understanding the intent of the customer, let's walk through an example of it, right? Let's say Kelly goes and deposits money into her account, right? Maybe online or through the mobile app. Well, the bank says, great, Kelly is a good standing, she has a good balance, end of story. In reality, the bank actually knows a heck of a lot more about Kelly, except that they typically are not able to leverage that knowledge in real time and or even leverage it in a way to understand what to do about Kelly. So it happens to be the case, and the bank should know this and does know this from payments patterns and so forth. Kelly has student debt. Kelly just got married, right? Kelly is actually saving to buy a house. That is something that could have been inferred from her behavior and change of behavior over time. And what the bank could have done had they leveraged this information is basically make offers that make sense to Kelly, feel relevant, and in fact increase the trust of the relationship and increases the value of the bank. That is predicated on knowing the intent of Kelly. And this is something very, very difficult for banks to do today. We use big data as a tool. We started using it in a big way at Barclays. It was quite a struggle to kind of get a 325-year-old or 330-year-old bank to adopt big data, but we started with a cybersecurity project where the goal was to basically eliminate or reduce dramatically all the false alarms that were happening, and worked closely with the cybersecurity team, brought data from all over the bank, internal and external, into this platform. We call this data fusion, which is the ability to bring this data, fuse it, and then enable people to utilize it, people in the SOC, in the Security Operations Center, to utilize it by detecting the right things they need to pay attention to, and then once they focus their attention, having enough context and data to quickly decide the outcome, which was a beautiful fusion in my mind of automated AI with human decision-making in the right context. Something happened that's very interesting afterwards is once other groups started seeing this, e.g. financial crime, fraud, marketing, even risk, they all wanted to have access to this data. They all wanted to have this platform to basically make what they do simpler, and they all recognized they had big data problems, so it kind of started spreading in the bank as a big and very useful tool. The other problem that face many organizations, which is very challenging, is they have expectations. They want data to be reliable, affordable, timely, accurate, comprehensive, unified, accessible, easy to understand, and easy to embed into business actions. Reality is, none of these are true in most organizations I know of. And we can go through the discussion and discuss why this is the case and why this is so unfortunate. Big data came in as a tool that can kind of promise to kind of address a lot of these issues and make them easy. Of course, we highly recommend when you do your data, your big data, you have a data strategy. We are big believers in our 5 R's of data strategy, which are the roadmap that basically aligns with the business, the revenue, the catalog of opportunities where data can give you an upside, including creating new revenue streams as well as enhancing existing ones. Relevance, understanding the value of data and how to understand their customers based on it. And of course, reference. We actually build iteratively, but to a reference architecture. And the other thing I wanted to point out about big data is that 90% of data in any organization is unstructured. Yet 100% of database technology in an enterprise, in a typical enterprise, is structured, which means we're really ignoring the majority of the data we have available to us in most organizations today. And this is why we believe big data platforms will play a big role here. So big data is not just about big volume, but but it's really about dealing with the unstructured and the variety in the data. So the questions are, is data under control and is it serving the business? The reason I use the words under control is because we typically see that big data can typically lead to a big mess and very quickly. It's easy to put together a data lake that turns into a big, effectively, data swamp. And you lose control of it, you don't understand what's in it, and it becomes suddenly a major drain. That is why we're a big believer in a data as a service, where pretty much a lot of the governance is built in, the standards are built in, and the API kind of allows you to use the data as a utility and not bother with spending your time trying to reinvent it. We learned a lot by building these data utilities, how to make it cheaper by leveraging open source, how to avoid the issues of data quality by having built-in data governance and processing, how to evolve from structured data only to actually allowing the other 90% of the data to speak and help, and how to avoid kind of these old dead-end platforms and do these migrations without going through a lot of pain into the new platforms. And finally, how to deal with the lack of talent, which is one of the biggest issues when it comes to talking about big data and AI. And hopefully we will discuss some of that in our discussion. We're big believers in agile, and therefore when we want to build our big data warehouse, we actually build it in parts. So let's say you want to deal with a customer churn management problem. We build only a slice of that data as a service, only bringing in the data we need to support that one case study. Typically we have a magic number, 12 weeks. Within 12 weeks, we'd like to have value delivered to the business, proving the value and generating more demand from the business. Then you pick up another use case that brings in a bit more data, a third use case brings in more. And by the time you've done 3 or 4, you have 60 to 80% of the data in, and you're up and running with a big data service, doing it iteratively and doing it kind of in the context of business. A few words I'm going to say about AI, and then I'll stop. A very old concept. It's been around for a long time. It got a lot of hype over the past 40 years. And the excessive hype has led to 2 winters, right? The first winter was in the mid-1970s, where everybody said this technology goes nowhere, it's useless, and people were distancing themselves from it. It came back in the early 80s, only to have another big AI winter in the early 90s, where everybody again disowned any AI work they're doing, etc. And I see the same hype happening today. People are overblowing the potential achievements. People are scared of the technology, thinking that it will render them jobless, brainless. Everybody's scared of, in the US, of China 2030. In the last winter, people were worried about the Japan AI program, or what was called 5th generation systems, which again was no threat in the end. But I see the same kind of pattern of hype that happened last time happening again. And I'm predicting kind of the next AI winter to happen within the next 5 years. So winter is coming, except for one thing. One area of AI, one subset of AI has survived both winters, and this is machine learning. What is so special about machine learning? Well, it's about basically using data to derive shortcuts to a lot of the problems that we don't know how to solve with AI, and I don't have enough time to talk about all these problems, including common sense reasoning, natural language understanding, vision, etc. But the reason these algorithms work is because of I have a great quote by my friend Peter Norvig at Google. We don't have better algorithms, we just have more data. So the real question is, what are you doing with all this data? And without real data, without quality data, AI will go nowhere. So data is a necessary condition for you to have any successful AI happen. And for us, data as a service is the only way to do it practically in an enterprise, so that it's not a pain to leverage the data to do AI. I have been around for many years, as Eduardo alluded to, learned many lessons. I'm sharing with you 5 lessons here very quickly because we don't have time, but basically you need to reduce the problem to a very narrow one if you're trying to solve an AI problem. Data is a necessary enabler, so if you don't have data, it's not going to work. So is your data managed as an asset? AI and machine learning are very finicky. They expect data to be in certain formats, and they need a lot of transformation and a lot of fine-grained detail. So you must have a platform that provides that, not just aggregates for reporting. AI operations should actually model and understand intent, because with intent, you can understand the actors and then you can have some intelligence into what you do. And finally, there is no autonomous AI and there is no general AI. Anybody who tries to sell you AI that does stuff on its own is probably selling you a lot of smoke and mirrors. It is about having a hybrid AI or experiential AI or AI with a human in the loop, where you leverage the best of the human and the best of the machine to actually solve significant problems. With that, I will conclude this presentation by kind of leaving you thinking, do you know the big picture? Do you have a unified view of a customer? Do you have the context of your customer and their interactions? Do you understand them? Can you provide data-driven, personalized offers and content? Is data access democratized? Is it a utility? And can your data enable intelligence in your digital channels, which is the only way to make those digital channels relevant? So with that, I'll end it and I'll hand it over to my colleague, Shailesh, for his presentation. So Shailesh, it's all yours.
Thank you very much, Dr. Fayyad.
Thank you, Usama. Let's see. Eduardo, can you see my screen?
Yep, looks good.
Okay. Well, thanks, thanks Eduardo and Usama for for your pieces on how to get started and things like that. I think very, very insightful. So I'm not gonna take a lot of time covering slides. I only have a few. I just wanted to talk about some of the things that we see from a banking point of view and how they have an impact on the customer. So, we are in 5 countries, and the challenge with everything else that's going on is how do you use technology to deliver a human experience? And I emphasize human when I speak to my team and my peers across the industry, because that's a big opportunity and a challenge at the same time. We can all automate, we can all use machines and things like that to do a lot of cool things, which is great, and that's the technology lends itself is quite mature. But how do you humanize it? Right, so this is how banking used to be, and I would argue, depending on where you are, it's still somewhat like this, even though a lot of the plumbing is now primarily tech enabling it. And with everything else that you guys have been exposed to and I have been exposed to, this is how it seems like aspects of banking are being enabled using, right? So we've been playing around with robotics, whether it's hardware or software inside the bank, and there are some cool things we've done, and there are some things that we're still playing around with. Is it prime time? The jury's out on that, but there is stuff that's happening out there. Analytics, which is a lot of the stuff that, for example, Usama covered. How does data power the next generation of the human experience that we can deliver to customers across channels? It doesn't necessarily restrict itself to the digital only channel. Even when you go into the branch, for example, you can use technology to make the experience a delightful one. And then obviously, all the stuff that, with respect to machine learning, artificial intelligence, and a whole bunch of other things in between. How do you make sure that you make the best of what's available out there? Now, internally, what we look at, and these are some of the things that we are focusing on. How do you make banking simply simple? At the end of the day, we are custodians of people's money, and we lend money. That's in essence what we do. Every bank across the globe generally does these 2 things. And then there are, constructs of those 2 things, as in you have mortgage, you have a credit card, you have a loan, you have all those things are variants of one of those 2 core things that banks do. So how do you, given that that's the basic, how do you make it simply simple for consumers across the channels? And that's a massive opportunity. We can all say this challenger bank and that incumbent bank has done a great job. In my view, it remains a massive opportunity to make sure that we're doing it right by the customer. Then the other one is how do you use data? We've got tons of data that we, and we can talk about big data, small data, whatever else you want in the middle. But there are some basic things that we can start with. For example, the simplest example I give just to make the point is every bank has customers' date of birth. When was the last time a bank said happy birthday to you? And it's got nothing to do with how you use the data, how you monetize the data, how you add value. It's about surprising the customer. And this is the simplest thing one can do, for example. We generally have passport data on file. And so I know when your passport expires. When was the last time I gave you a simple clue as to saying, hey, by the way, in 6 months, your passport's going to expire? It's got nothing to do with banking. But just to make the point, when we talk about data, and it doesn't have to be rocket science. There are simple things we can start with, right? And then the last one is about customer life moments. And I've got a very nice depiction of what I mean by that. But the idea is how do you enable life moments rather than product push, right? So this is, talking about life moments. You've got the customer at the center, and the customer interacts with whether it's a bank or otherwise. In this case, I'll talk about a bank, through these channels and maybe some more, coming in the future. But that's how the customer currently interacts with the bank. How does the bank see, when it comes to offering, experiences to customer? It's a very product centric. I offer an FD, I give you a car loan, I give you an investment, product, I give you a credit card, debit card, things like that. Maybe a wallet, a savings account. That's how typically banks see, what they offer. But from a customer's point, so this is a very inside out, way of looking at things. But if I flip it on its head and I say outside in, what do the customers care about? There are things that they do on a day-to-day basis, and there are things that they do which are episodic in nature. So they don't happen on a daily basis. For example, you don't buy a house every day. You don't have a child, but those are life moments that you really cherish and you care about. And the bank and other entities play a role or can play a role, a meaningful role in enabling those kind of things. So I think that's very, very important. How do you make sure you look at things from a customer's lens as opposed to a product lens? Right? And I just wanted to use a non-banking example just to make the point. This is a very, very recent experience that I had. So given that we were in the COVID situation and things were bad, I was constantly looking at tickets online when they open up, so I can go see my parents who are in Delhi. And lo and behold, on the 18th of June, Malaysian Airlines displayed that flights are flying to Delhi. So I booked the flight on the 19th to go on the 3rd of July. The airline canceled the flight on the 22nd, which is okay, completely understand, right? Then I get an upgrade email on the 29th for the same flight, which is canceled by the airline, and the email comes from the airline. Now, all that said, I'm still waiting for a refund. So that's one thing, and it's again a very simple thing. How can you, not use basic information when you're communicating with customers, right? So using data is one thing, but then what do you do with it? How do you use it effectively? This is, again, nothing to do with big data. It's very, very simple, basic stuff. One data field and one email ID. That's all you have to do to make sure that the experience I'm getting is the right one, right? So I'll take a pause here, pass it back to Eduardo, and we can get on with the Q&A.
Yeah, thank you very much for that presentation. It's great to have a real story that shows exactly what, these kind of, like what it means, right? To be more intimate with the customer, even when you have a digital kind of experience and you don't have that human touch. So yeah, so let's get towards some questions. We do have some questions in Zoom, and so please keep them coming. I will start with some of my questions, and I'll mix in audience questions during the Q&A. There's also going to be a couple of questions where we're going to show you a poll, and these polls are completely anonymous. We have no idea who answered them or what they'll be, but feel free to send in your answer if you like that question or have something that you would like us to see. Okay, so let's get started with the first question, which I'll put to Shailesh. So what ways do you think technology has really transformed the business model of the banking industry?
I think if you look at the recent events that have transpired across the globe, which is the COVID situation, right? And even before that, but COVID just surfaced the need for technology or the importance of technology. It's no longer, whether you have various things that you used in the past. Right now, even if you go to the branch, for example, 100% of everything that happens there is enabled by tech, right? If you, and the current situation restricted people from being able to go to the branches, right? Even though banking is an essential service and we had all the branches open, barring exceptions here and there, which were hot zones identified, it was all open. But the benefit for a lot of banks like ourselves is the focus that we've always had, which is digital at the core, allowed us to make sure that there's zero service disruption when it comes to customers being able to access what they want from the bank on mobile, internet, or other channels, which is including the branches. If they go there, it's all tech. So technology is not something that you can choose to ignore. You cannot live without technology, whether it's banking or any other industry for that matter.
I mean, I'll also, Eduardo, if I may, I'll add one other thing, which is it's not only just the front office of the bank that has been transformed, forced by the COVID. It's also the back office, right? Think about where people work from. Think about how much do you need people? Where do you need people? Where should you utilize people, right? I had, in my time at Barclays and working with many of our banking clients, there's a lot of work that happens in the back office, whether it's risk, finance, treasury, what have you, that involves a lot of manual adjustments, manual approaches, people kind of slugging data and exchanging it. A lot of these things, as banks understand it, especially when they see the new challenger banks and the digital banks coming onto the picture, they quickly realize, hey, what we're doing is crazy. We used to get away by leaving it like it is. Now we can no longer do that. So a lot of thinking in the back office around automation, which brings accuracy, higher value, and a lot of good things that come with automation. You do fewer errors, you never tire, you basically grow to trust the bank more, and the bank gets to use its employees for more strategic decision-making and thinking, not for kind of low-level menial tasks. So I think it's been extremely transformative, and it's getting appreciated by the day.
Yeah, thanks for that. So speaking of strategy, Dr. Usama, what would you say, how has data really changed the strategy, like the high-level strategy of these enterprises?
What happened, look, I mean, I think as enterprises began realizing that their data is worth something, and by the way, I think a lot of them got shook up by the fact that a lot of the newcomers, and newcomers nowadays, think of Google as a newcomer, right? And what does Google do? What product does Google have? What content do they produce, right? Nothing. It's just basically an ability to process data correctly and make data available and get repackaged, right? In the wireless companies, many of them kind of dismissed a lot of the companies like Google, Facebook, WhatsApp, what have you, right? And then they came up with a term for it called OTT, over the top. What does that mean? Well, it means that most of the value flowed away from them. They became essentially just a communication pipe when everybody else started capturing the value on top. So that realization, there's been an awakening to realize that, hey, actually, if I have data, I may know certain things that people are very interested in, and that data is in itself worth a lot as an asset. So the fact that I process payments as a bank also gives me amazing visibility as to what the economic activity is, what is picking up, what is coming down. Guess what? There are many, many companies who would pay, who would value this as gold, right? Because it gives them insights that they can't get otherwise. You could tell companies where they're losing clients, to whom are they losing, who are their best competitors, who are where they're beginning to lose, where their audiences are. All of this is a side effect of doing your business properly. So there's a new kind of generation of thinking around data monetization, data assets, and what is my data worth, and how can I put this data to work in ways that actually help my customers, but also help me be resilient and capture more of the value. So there's a lot, and that started with the evolution of the chief data officer, but now we're seeing a lot more happening with the chief digital officers, like Shailesh gaining the innovation title and so forth, where basically data is beginning to play a much larger role in how they think about their business and how they think about the fact that we are moving from an economy of transactions to an economy of interactions. And in that economy of interactions, we get a lot of rich information that tells us a lot more about what that customer or consumer is trying to do and allows us to become more relevant to them.
Thanks for those insights. So one more question for Shailesh next. So as a CDIO, do you think a unified digital transformation strategy is important, for the company, or is it too difficult of a thing to achieve? Like, would you recommend an agile approach or kind of design upfront approach when it comes to like the entire digital transformation strategy?
I think digital is the most talked about, and people use that term quite often, digital transformation. To me, digital is just a channel. It just so happens that with the change in consumer adoption of technology, smartphones being one of them, digital has taken a priority compared to other channels, or a higher priority compared to other channels, and everybody's rushing to move whatever they did on physical channels onto digital channels. So when it comes to strategy, I think in my personal view, it's more about what's the customer strategy that the bank has or any other entity has. And digital happens to be one of the channels, which is absolutely important because that's the customer's preferred channel of choice. Generally speaking, there are still a lot of consumers that would rather go, depending on what they want to do, they would rather go to the branch or have someone from the bank approach them and talk about the service that they want. But for most of the basic things, you don't necessarily need to, because it's an inconvenience, right? To go to the branch, for example, it's actually quite a pain for the customer. You have to first decide when to go, then you have to worry about traffic, then you have to get there if you're driving, find a parking spot, then you have to go into the branch and wait for the next available teller to help you, then you actually get the service, then you worry about going back home. It's actually not the most convenient channel for basic stuff. If there is some value-added things. So coming back to the question, I think it's about the customer strategy and the business strategy as opposed to just one channel strategy. That's the way I look at it. And agility is absolutely critical. Whatever the strategy is, how you execute, you are better off doing it in an agile manner as opposed to a big bang, way of doing it.
And I would always add that think through your data strategy when you're doing digital. because without it, you will go blind.
Yeah.
Makes a lot of sense. Okay, so next question that I have here are to Dr. Usama. What are the biggest barriers to leveraging AI in digital transformation today, do you say?
I think the biggest barrier, number one, is talent. So finding people who know what they're doing. Look, anybody can pick up kind of tools of AI and try to blindly apply them. But what you need is the art part of it, the part that kind of has the wisdom of understanding that these algorithms, and I'm sad to say this as somebody whose career has been in artificial intelligence essentially all my professional life, the algorithms are very simple and the algorithms are very dumb. So it's garbage in, garbage out, literally. So if you feed it something that is incorrect, typically that AI has no way of kind of having enough intelligence in there, so to speak, to realize that, hey, this is nonsense, this doesn't make sense, etc. Which is why it's really critical to figure out how to fuse the human input at the right place to help that AI out of its problems and out of trouble it can get itself into. The other thing I would say about AI is there is a psychological fear in people because when they think the machine is getting smarter or more intelligent, and by the way, I have yet to meet a machine that's truly intelligent yet, so don't feel too scared, but we will get there. They'll get smarter. People start worrying about, well, there's a creepiness factor, there's a fear factor. So how do you utilize that technology without kind of getting people concerned, whether it's about kind of getting humans replaced or getting humans to feel like they're being watched by machines and these machines are tireless and they can kind of watch continuously, etc. So these things, they need to be guarded against and watch out for. One of my favorite sayings, I think it comes out of the MIT Media Lab, is AI is not about replacing a human with a robot. AI is about taking the robot out of the human. So basically, can we take all the mundane little tasks that involve, doing a lot of stuff that a human shouldn't be doing to begin with, like chasing data and looking for patterns through volumes and volumes of data, to a place where they can just quickly get presented with the right information in the right context and then render the decision making, the smart decision making, which, by the way, till this day, we can't get machines to match humans in, especially when it comes to common sense reasoning.
Yeah, that is very true. As somebody who's been in the field and in the trenches, so to say. So let's go into, you touched on a little bit on your answer, but this is something that I think is very important that I would like to talk about a little bit more, which is how does, and this is to both of you, how does a company attract talent which can help implement, these AI algorithms and analysis that the company needs?
So let me go first. So one of the things, we do a lot of things, not just for people within the AI space, but generally, when you talk about digital and there are lots of different domains where talent is a challenge, especially in the markets where we operate at the moment, barring I think the exception of Singapore, which also has a lot of talent coming from abroad. But having said that, what we're trying to do is we're trying to get a little bit creative in how we approach the talent opportunity or challenge. We run a lot of events which are to talk about the kind of things we do. That's to just make sure that there is a recognition of a brand out there, so people are interested. Then we go deeper into we run hackathons, datathons. So there's actually a datathon that's being scheduled for, I think, October, November timeframe this year, where we will have real life, challenges given to various participants. And that's the best way to learn. At the same time, identify, because it's not about theoretical, you go through a competency interview. it's about seeing people in action. And that's the best way in our view to identify talent. We in fact have a bunch of folks that joined a hackathon. We've done a couple already in the last year. And we've hired a whole bunch, some as interns and some are permanent. But these have demonstrated their skill set by doing, as opposed to just a competency interview. So we are trying to look at unique ways by which we can tap into the talent pool that's available. And then also we're working with academia. We do university events where we talk to various young students and aspiring students to get them in the door, and then buddy them up with people within the bank to coach them and grow them, so they are able to add value over a period of time.
Okay, yeah, that's really great. So in the interest of time, I'd like to go to the next question here. And so we do have a poll for this one. So if people, if we can show that poll there we go. So yeah, so while people are answering this poll, what do you guys think? Is data an asset or a liability? Because actually a few questions that came in here were talking about that, that it might be a deprecating asset, for example, and there's this talk about privacy as well. So what would you think, or what are your opinions on this matter?
I think if people vote now, we can share the results with them all, and this is all anonymous, so we don't know your answer.
So yeah, I think, yeah, it is a pretty interesting question. So let's give just a minute, I guess, for the poll, and then we can close it and see the answers and kind of discuss what people feel.
So Zina, is the poll working? Are people seeing the question?
Yep.
All right, perfect.
Okay.
So we share the results?
I think we can probably do that.
I think Zina can share the result.
Yeah, so based off of your presentations, I think that you might be both in the asset side of things, and it looks like our audience is also in the asset side of things. So wow, okay, so we have a 0%. Nobody's said liability, but a few people, about 10% said it's neutral. It is both an asset and a liability. So what would you think? Like if you were to say, is it 80% asset and 20% liability, or is it more like 50 or 50%? Would you say?
I'll take the first crack at the answer and let Shailesh give his view. My personal observation, working with a lot of companies, and we do work with a lot of companies who have the desire to make it an asset. I would say in most companies, it's a liability and it's not an asset, meaning they actually collect the data and they guard the data very closely. In fact, in many organizations, I'll share with you stories where, the data warehouse is really a write-only store. So nobody can read from it, but you just keep collecting data into it. So the pattern I've seen, which is counter to what this audience actually is experiencing, is that in most companies, data is not leveraged. It sits there as a liability, and I call it a liability because most of these organizations view it as just a cost center, and it's a risk, right? It's waiting to be externally hacked or internally leaked and causing a big problem. So certainly Open Insight's mission in life is to kind of change that and make sure that data is an asset and is working for the business. Sadly, my own experience is it's the opposite today.
I don't disagree with what Usama mentioned, right? I think if you don't utilize and make the best of what you have, it is a liability. Otherwise, and I gave you very, very simple examples at the outset, right? As simple as using the date of birth and saying happy birthday. It's got nothing to do with rocket science or complexity. I can tell you, I bank with various banks across the globe, zero. So, that's what I mean by it can be a massive asset to making sure, we delight customers at every touch point. Until you start, it is just, a bunch of zeros and ones sitting somewhere in the database collecting dust.
Yeah, thank you for those answers.
And by the way, it is also a depreciating asset, right? So the longer it sits, the longer it becomes irrelevant. So it's good to use it soon.
Yeah, I think that's actually something that one of the attendees mentioned, and I think that is very insightful as well.
Yeah.
Okay, so I would like to take kind of like the last 5 minutes to ask a few questions from the audience, which I think are very interesting. One of the first ones is talking about how machine learning and deep learning have this problem of being a black box, right? And unable to give an explanation of why it made a certain decision. And he thinks perhaps this could be a problem in banking for the most part. So what are your thoughts on this matter of having kind of black box algorithms? Do you think it's a problem?
It's a great question, and it's a huge problem. But let me actually kind of share the good news, right? So deep learning, which effectively is undecodable by humans, i.e. a neural net that's very complex, both in depth and in breadth. It works, and it's gotten a lot of press and a lot of attention. But here's what I would say. It works well in problems that even humans can't explain. So what do I mean by that? Think of things that we call in the AI field procedural knowledge, right? So as an example, if I ask the audience, hey, can you move your little pinky? Hopefully most of the people in the audience can do it. Now if I say, explain to me, how did you cause your pinky to move, right? There is no way you can actually explain it, right? That is an example of procedural knowledge. That is how we actually process speech. That is how much of our vision happens. It's all procedural. We don't understand it. And in those kinds of tasks, deep learning is appropriate and is reasonable to use because nobody really expects an explanation. However, in real applications and real enterprises, not just banking, by the way, across the board, right? So I've been in banking, for example, in credit, there are laws that says you can't deny somebody credit unless you can explain to them why, right? And you can't tell them, well, I took a combination of 16 attributes, fed them through a sigmoid, they went over a certain threshold, and unfortunately for you, the threshold was too low for you, and that's it. You're out. That's not an explanation. So there's a legal requirement there for an explanation, and such models run into problems. I'll tell you another ones that people don't think about frequently. I've been involved in problems like predictive maintenance, right? Where I spend my time trying to figure out, this is in a factory, for example, or in a big plant, when is a machine about to fail, and can we go fix it before it fails, so we avoid the cost of kind of taking down the production line and all that. You go to the head engineer with a signal that says the machine is about to fail. Unless you have an explanation of why do you believe this machine is going to fail, good luck convincing somebody to take down a big machine, stop production, do maintenance on it without an explanation, right? So there's many areas where explanation is required, and I'm actually, explainable AI is one of my favorite areas of AI, the two that I like a lot these days. And by the way, this comes from a hardcore AI guy who used to believe it's all about the machine. The machine is much better than the human. You never need the human. I have been completely flipped through my career to basically say my two favorite fields are explainable AI, how to make the decisions understandable by a human being and justifiable. And the second one is experiential or human in the loop AI. How do we combine the low-level AI with the high-level and kind of abilities of the human to make the decisions, the right decision in the right context. So yeah, great question, great question. And the good news is a lot of algorithms outside of deep learning work just fine, are explainable, and there are many, many techniques to kind of extract explanations, but it needs a lot more attention than the attention that deep learning, blind black box deep learning is getting.
Thank you for that. Shailesh, did you have any kind of quick responses to that as well, or?
I don't think I can add any more than what, how eloquently Osama put it, but yeah.
Okay, so we are unfortunately at time. I think it's probably best for everyone if we start kind of concluding and closing up things here, unless you guys wanted to continue with one more question or so.
We probably could do one more question.
Okay, yeah, so let's do one more question here. So yeah, I mean, there's a lot of really good questions. I'm not sure which one is the best one to go.
By the way, we will post follow-ups to take a lot of the questions and answer them online on LinkedIn, Twitter, etc. So we'll be following up on this. So look for the posts. So pick one, Eduardo.
Yeah. So so let's do. This is a good question that I think is kind of interesting and probably quick. What kind of unstructured data do banks collect? Essentially, he's asking, shouldn't transactional data always be structured? And that's a really good question that I think Shailesh can give us a little bit of insight on.
I mean, yeah, so transactional data, as the person highlighted, is obviously structured. But a simple example of unstructured data is, when we, or when consumers interact, or even businesses interact with banks, right? These days, it's not the channel that the bank has open as an official channel. I would argue there's a lot of stuff we get on Twitter. There's a lot of stuff we get on Facebook. There's a lot of, this is customers interacting with us and posting stuff, whether it's a positive opinion, it's a service they had an issue with, or if it's something else that they want the bank to look at. So all that stuff is, and it's a massive, in fact, I've got a team that goes through piles and piles of, customer verbatim to make sense out of it in a meaningful way, so we can then derive insights and then take action, because the volume is so high. And that's one very simple example of unstructured data that we get above and beyond the stuff that we may want to go look at on other channels.
I'll also add to this that when I said 90% of, I mean, not me, Gartner and others, 90% of data in an organization is unstructured. Let's think in a bank. Think about all the contracts. Think about all the descriptions of products. Think about all the complaints that come in. Think about all the calls that come into the call center. Think about all the video feeds that come in from the branches on whether they help you with footfall, identifying issues, security incidents, what have you. Think about, actually, I'm going to use one example. We had it at Barclays, right? Which is, one of my big nightmares used to be at Barclays when I get a call from and I worked at Barclays in a global role with all parts of the bank, retail, corporate, wealth, etc. I would get a call from the wealth head of the wealth bank saying, hey, Usama, your team messed up again. You sent 10 million pounds to the wrong party, right? Now go back and try to fix it. What happens typically? It's a fat finger mistake, right? Some poor people have to be typing all these things and they type the wrong account number. And it goes off and then it gets caught later. And then it gets caught sometimes 2 or 3 days, 5 days later. Then you're on this daily call trying to fix it. I'll give you something else that's very common. There is an operation in the bank that has to do with standard settlement instructions, right? So you get an instruction that says, I finished this transaction, now pay this party from this account to this account. like settling a trade or a bond purchase or what have you, right? So now think about this. The bank gets a form, typically in a fax. They have to read the fax, and they have to fill another form, typically online. This is somebody in the data operations team. And of course, fat finger mistake, it goes to the wrong account, it goes to the wrong amount, what have you. A lot of these things can benefit greatly and have benefited. In fact, at Barclays, we implemented a machine learning algorithms where we crowdsourced from our colleagues. So the machine learning would watch the colleagues do the work. And actually, the algorithms figured out that, oh, there's only 60 to 80 varieties of forms that come in and forms that have to be filled out. That's nothing to a machine. It recognizes the patterns, and then suddenly it says, oh, I know, from this kind of form, I grab it from here, I put it in this form online here, I'll ask the human to check it, and we take something that takes 20 minutes down to 30 seconds, less work on the human. The human is still needed to verify it and okay it. In fact, we sped it up so much that the bank said we're going to put 2 pairs of eyes on it, right? So there's an example of a lot of unstructured data that has to be dealt with. Yet the banks, the way they deal with it is they compensate for it by inserting humans to help extract the structure out of the unstructured data, much like Shailesh said so eloquently. So, you know, we have to start leveraging the technology to kind of reduce this kind of sifting by humans and use the humans to kind of understand what the heck these signals are saying.
Yeah, thanks. That's really good, like concrete examples that show the kind of surprising thing of how banks have unstructured data that they're not leveraging. They're essentially throwing away.
Yep.
Okay, so we are over time. With the last few minutes here, I would like to do a quick conclusion to wrap it up for everybody here. So yeah, essentially, you know, data is something that banks can leverage to, you know, bring back personalization into customer interaction when we're moving into this more and more digital world. Like the pandemic has really forced a lot of companies to go from, you know, digital as an extra thing into digital as a very essential part of their business. And AI, I think, is a very core and part of that to you know, make it so that we're not dealing with you know, the quintessential robot that really doesn't care about you. This kind of emotional intelligence is an important part of kind of keeping, retaining, and growing your customer base. And I would like to thank Dr. Fayyad and Shailesh for giving us their insights into how you can do this in your own companies. And if you have any questions, you can contact us, you know, either SkyMind, Open Insights, or even Shailesh. He will probably hook you up with, you know, more information about how you can do this, how you can leverage, you know, our expertise or advice for your own projects as well. So with that, I'd like to thank everybody once again, and I hope to be able to do another webinar with you sometime soon. And yeah, so thank you very much.
Thank you, and thanks everyone for attending. And we will answer the rest of the questions online. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Follow everyone everywhere, and you will see your answer. Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.